This episode is brought to you by G2A. With so many digital storefronts to choose from these days, it can be difficult to find the best bang for your gaming buck. G2A has been helping to solve this problem since 2013, offering over 75,000 digital gaming products in one easy-to-navigate marketplace. Looking for some awesome electronics, geeky gadgets, or quirky collectibles? G2A has you covered there as well. And the best part? It all comes with steep discounts you won't find anywhere else. See the deals that you've been missing and let them know that we sent you by visiting bit.ly/RHPG2A. That's bit.ly/RHPG2A. Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to episode 39 of a Retro Hangover.
And hello, Internet. Welcome to the podcast that always remembers that E3 is around, even though Sony hasn't. And this week, we remember that Nintendo nails nostalgia nicely, and that is all I'm going to say for alliteration, because that's all I need to say this week. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, and I am joined today by your host, Shane Dick Dragon Boomerang Koski.
You know, I don't normally like to say that someone, like, air quotes, won E3 or anything, because it sounds kind of cringy a lot of the time, but I gotta be honest, Nintendo did a pretty good job this time around. I am impressed. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm gonna spend money that I shouldn't on.
I'm just gonna say, in 2015, I said games were dead. For this generation,
how's that working out for you?
New games were dead. Well, I made a lot of calls to a lot of people, and fortunately, they listened to me. And I called up, and they said that I told them they had to start making good games, right? And I told them that they need to make gaming great again. And you know what?
Did you make hats?
Maybe. I'm trying to remember. It would have been a really good idea, but I told them to make gaming great again. And then, you know, EA and Ubisoft and all these other companies sucked. But all the imports decided they were going to make gaming great again. So Nintendo, welcome back. Well, you've been back for a while now. Sega, welcome back with Panzer Dragoon. Konami, welcome back with Contra. Just got to say, Squaresoft, welcome back by not completely making Final Fantasy VII look like it's going to suck. All these import companies, you are doing great. We need more imports to help make gaming great again. And I would even say if you have to bootleg these imports and play them illegally, even better. You need to import bootlegs, video games to keep gaming great.
I was going to say, are you just saying words now? I think
yes.
You're just saying words.
Yes.
Okay.
Making gaming great again.
We're gonna build a gaming wall, and we're gonna make Japan pay for it.
Well, I mean, Blizzard has a firewall, and they can go fuck themselves.
Yeah. Well, so I feel like we could. Well, honestly, I think we could probably fill almost a whole episode's worth of time just talking about all the cool shit that we've been seeing coming out of E3, and there's a lot that I would want to talk about. So I'm gonna force myself to try to keep this brief, because I know at least I have a penchant for kind of going on and on about shit if I don't watch myself.
Just a tad.
Man, there's a lot of good shit there, man. Like, okay, first of all, I would like to find out which FBI agent has been listening in on my conversations, because whoever it was apparently passed that information on, and they are making a Dark Crystal Tactics game, which is like scientifically engineered to be the exact fucking thing I want.
That's wild. I wasn't expecting to see anything like that.
No, not at all. And it's the art style too actually looks a little bit like what they're doing with the Link's Awakening remake too.
It looks really good. I hate the Dark Crystal personally. I can't stand that movie.
What? That I feel personally attacked by this.
Feel personally attacked. Feel offended, Snowflake.
Yeah, I fucking do.
We're making gaming great.
Movie is great.
We're making gaming great, Snowflake. Shut up.
Well, you know what? We're a gaming podcast, but just because of that, we'll do a fucking Dark Crystal episode. I don't give a shit.
I get sick, physically ill watching that movie. But it looks like a really good game.
It's okay to be wrong. That's fine.
Yeah, like I said, everyone's entitled to the wrong opinion, and you're entitled to this one.
Yeah. So also, I don't know how long presumably they've probably been planning it for a while, but I feel like with all of the like love on the internet that Keanu Reeves has been getting lately, the fact that CD Projekt Red came out with like cyborg Keanu in Cyberpunk 2077 is like just the perfect timing for that.
That's it looks good. It looks really good.
Yeah, it really does.
I'm happy they picked him up. I mean, his presentation.
I feel like
when they got him on screen, Keanu Reeves acted like he had no idea how to be on screen.
That describes his acting career, Chris.
Pretty much. I mean, he's best when he doesn't talk.
Like the guy, but damn, like he's never been like an amazing actor.
He's a great action actor, apparently. I mean, you don't have to talk a lot, and when he doesn't have to talk a lot, he's at his best.
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, everybody's got their niche, and his is to not act while you're acting, and he does that very well. That's why he was great as Neo.
Yeah, I'm the one.
Whoa. But yeah, so there's like a little teaser for Breath of the Wild 2, which I guess means I should probably finish that game.
Be a good idea.
I don't know, man. I just kind of got kind of burnt out on that game, I guess. Like I think I'm technically still in the last dungeon for what were the beasts called? I don't even remember.
Oh, I don't know. I never played it, but my son did, and he could probably give you some tips.
Oh, okay. Well, the four beasts, or the divine beast. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. I'm in the last one right now, so I'm like technically kind of close to the end of the game. I put a lot of time into it. I don't know. I kind of fell off of it. I guess it just didn't keep my interest. So I should probably go back and just finish that.
I always thought that the point of that game was that you're always close to the end of the game. Like you could just go and beat it if you wanted to.
I mean, you can, sure. You can, if you are, super, if you get good or whatever, like you can go right from the beginning area and apparently go directly to Hyrule Castle if you wanted to.
Yeah, Zelda Souls.
I of course did not do that, but
okay.
Yeah. I'm not that good at the video games.
Anything else you're super excited about?
Oh man, let's see. There's that. I mean, you mentioned the FF7 remake, which I was, and I think a lot of people were, but I was very hesitant about. But I think with what they showed this time around, I'm feeling a lot better about it. I think I mentioned this on a previous episode at some point, but I had said that if they do that right, I might actually be interested in playing FF7. And it looks like I might actually do that. I am cautiously optimistic about the combat system. I think the mix of like real-time combat with like the ATB gauges, and then also the option to kind of put it into a tactical, like almost pseudo turn-based mode, kind of splits the difference really well. So of course it remains to be seen whether or not it actually does split the difference well, or if it just kind of like highlights the worst parts of both of those sorts of systems because it doesn't do either of them particularly well. So we'll have to see how that turns out. But if they provide a better, like a streamlined system like that, and hopefully get rid of all the weird esoteric shit that you had to do, that you needed a strategy guide for in that game, which is the reason I stopped playing it.
Oh, don't worry. They're already putting stuff behind the paywall, so you don't have to look for it. You just have to buy it. Well,
good. If I just want all of my Ultima weapons, I can pay $19.99 and unlock them, and I'll be done with it
for each episode.
So there you go. Yeah. Well, so I'm not even a huge like FF7 fan, obviously.
Right.
But I do like the characters, and I appreciate the actual like story of the game and everything. It's just some of the bullshit in there that I really am not a fan of. But having said that, even I went and looked at that like special edition that they've got out there on the Square Enix store.
Only $330.
Oh my god, dude! I looked at that. I was like, yeah, man, that Cloud figure looks pretty cool. He's got his bike and his big sword with his hair. I was like, I wonder what this is gonna run me. And I was like, whoo, $329. It is not worth that much to me. Holy shit!
Nope. But it comes with free DLC.
Of course, I did see a couple of people posting already on my social media, being like, "Yep, already put my money down." I'm like, okay.
Well, I'm glad they have that kind of money. Good for them,
right? Yeah. But anyway, yeah. Outside of that, I am. Speaking of cautious optimism, I'm also kind of looking forward to the new Contra game that's apparently coming out, and I say that because I like Contra, but also most Contra games have been garbage, and the fact that this is a like third person shooter, looks like a twin stick thing. I don't know how I feel about that. It actually didn't look all that great either, so I'm actually a little worried about that one.
Just think of it this way, Shane. It's going to be more entertaining than a pachinko machine.
That's a low bar, man.
But that's what it would have been if they didn't come out with this. You get the Contra pachinko machine.
I suppose that's true.
H.R. Geiger's like eating the pachinko balls. I like how it's a pseudo sequel to Hardcore.
Yeah. It's weird though because it's and I don't have a lot of familiarity with the events of Hardcore, but was any of like that sort of almost campy looking shit in Hardcore? Because like this game had. What the fuck was that? Like
panda.
A panda?
Yeah, a panda.
Was that in one of the other games?
No. But you have a cyborg panda.
Okay.
Hardcore had 2 humans, much like you do in this one.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a wolf man and a tiny robot.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear that there wasn't a precedent for a panda in a Contra game.
No, but they did have a wolf man.
Oh, yeah, but that's edgy, man.
I mean, come on, just relax. It's a game. If you get your expectations up and you want it to be dark and gray, you want it to look like what they did with fucking...
I don't, though.
Bionic
I don't
Commando.
want it to be dark and gray.
Do you want Bionic Commando Contra Edition?
Yeah, Commando Rearmed Edition. Yeah. AKA, we fucked this up and here's us trying to fix it.
Bionic Commando Rearmed, that was the 2D version. That wasn't that bad.
Okay.
No, that wasn't bad. I'm talking about the one with Rad Spencer, again, in the 3D environment. That's all fucking garbage. That one.
Yeah, well, at any rate, we'll see. As much as I like Contra 3 and all, I'm going to wait for some reviews on that one.
Okay.
But I'm potentially looking forward to that. Yeah. Other than that, I am going to buy the Contra collection though for my Switch because I hate myself and I clearly don't need money, so I'm going to do that. I'm also debating whether or not I am going to buy that collection of mana that are going to release, but I don't know what I'm going to do with that because like I could just play it on an emulator.
Same with
and I guess
Contra.
I could say that about the Contra games too, but I don't know. Maybe it depends on the price point. These collections, I mean, like I got the Castlevania collection, and I think that was only like $20, right?
And you could emulate all those games too.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm just going to spend money that I don't have to. So
yeah,
there you go.
I mean, you don't have to spend money at all. You just not get these things at all. Then you don't have to spend money. You don't have to spend money. You're choosing to.
Well, if I didn't spend money on these things, then why even be on this show, Chris? I should just stop video games.
I said bootleg. At the beginning I said bootleg. Yarg.
Mm-hmm.
Pirate Bay.
The Bay of Pirates.
I've never
It doesn't exist anymore.
Which is weird because other than like downloading ROMs from like cool ROMs and those ROM sites, I've never been on these pirate torrents.
So what about you? Is there anything other than what we've already talked about that you're looking forward to? I know you've got some of your like your weeb shit that you're like all hyped about.
Oh fuck yeah. Trials of Mana. I can't wait for that remake. I really hope it's better than how they fucked up Secret of Mana when they re-released that, because that was awful.
Well, Trials of Mana is an action RPG.
Yeah,
right?
it's Seiken Densetsu 3. It's the third one that never came. It's the third Mana game that never got released over here in the United States. It's going to be out of the Mana collection. So for everyone who's listening, we're recording this the same day that the Nintendo Direct came out. So we watched the Direct. It's a couple hours afterwards. So today is when the collection of Mana is coming out. So Seiken Densetsu 3 has come out in the United States for the first time ever today. They're calling it Trials of Mana. super excited about the remake. Kind of excited about the Mana Collection. The reason I'm kind of excited is because I own Final Fantasy Adventure, a physical copy. Secret of Mana is on the SNES Classic, which I own. And I've played Second Densetsu 3 as an emulator to death. So it's kind of interested. I'm more interested in the remake. No More Heroes 3. Excited about that. Daemon X Machina. That looks fun. Astral Chain it reminds me a lot of Pandora's Tower, but better. And if anyone has not played Pandora's Tower, it's essentially the best 3D Castlevania game for your Nintendo Wii. And yeah, just really excited about a lot of stuff. Excited about the next Xbox to come out, Project Scarlet, or whatever the fuck they're going to call it, especially because it's backwards compatible all the way back to the original Xbox. So yeah, super stoked about that. Not really stoked about Halo. I've never really been stoked about first-person shooters, but that looks good graphically, I guess. Yeah, like E3 just came out, and I'm super excited about a lot of these things. I'm really looking forward to the Panzer Dragoon remake. I hope a lot of people buy that, because if they do, then we might get Zwei and Saga. And I think the more people who play Panzer Dragoon Saga, the better. So I'll talk more about the Final Fantasy VII aspect probably later. I'm not, just like Shane, and I did play. I was big into Final Fantasy VII. I have my reasons. I'm kind of hesitant on whether or not I'm going to like this game. It's episodic, so like they're going to supposedly end it when they get out of Midgard, and that's just such a small portion of the game. So how many bits and pieces are they going to divide this up into? And they're already introducing DLC, and it looked like Carbuncle was a DLC materia, which has been a traditional Final Fantasy summon forever, even though I hate putting Reflect on my characters in that game. I think it's useless, but he is just a traditional character. So there's a lot of questions. Is that going to work? Is pausing your combat in the middle of everything going to work all the time? It kind of worked for Mass Effect, but you didn't and Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, and stuff like that in the BioWare games, but you didn't have to fight for a while in order to build a gauge up in order to get into this tactical mode. You can get in the tactical mode at any time. So I'm interested to see how that's going to work. And how having multiple party members that you're constantly swapping back and forth to is going to work. But it looks really good. We'll see. I just hope it plays well. But I'm just very excited about everything that's going to come out on the Nintendo Switch. All the games, all the potential things that are coming out. It's just mind-blowing that we're just in this gaming age. And I thought that, like I said, 2015 modern gaming was dead. And that's one of the main reasons I was a retro gamer. And it's getting to the point now, it's like, I really want to play these new games because everything looks so good. It's been good for the past year and a half, and it's just looking better and better and better. And spring of 2020 is it's going to be nuts. There's just going to be so many quality games coming out during that time frame for everything. And I don't know how people are going to afford this. It's going to be crazy. But other than that, very quickly before I get to this brief topic, I think we've beaten E3 into the dust a little bit for intro. What have you been playing?
What have I been playing? I don't know. Most of the same usual stuff. I'm currently about to face off against the Elite Four in Let's Go EV, so about to finish up the story portion of that, and then I intend to complete my Pokedex for the first time ever. Even though I played the originals, I never actually caught them all, as it were. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. Let's see. I started kind of tinkering around with some of the games in the Castlevania collection since I bought that on my Switch. I haven't dove into Kid Dracula yet or anything, but I will do that. Let's see. What else have I been playing? I feel like there's something else, but I really... Oh, well, actually, one more thing that actually is still relevant to our topic today. But for those of you that didn't catch it or haven't seen it on our YouTube channel, I played through the entirety of Shadows of the Empire.
You poor brave bastard.
In one sitting on our Twitch stream. It took about 3.5 hours, I think.
Yes.
So that was a thing. I don't know. I felt like I felt drained after finishing that experience. I gotta be honest with you.
I don't think you're meant to.
But we made it
in one sitting.
We made it.
But you did it. You did it.
I did it.
Yep.
But that's about it, I think, for right now. So what about you? Anything new and interesting?
I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but I beat Wild Arms 2. 6 out of 10 game. Yeah,
Okay.
6 out of 10 game. Not terrible, not great. I beat Dead Space, played through Dead Space, so I finally made it through a somewhat recent modern game. So hooray me! There you go. I thought that's a fantastic game. If
it is,
so I'm finally catching up to 2008, and I've been replaying Saga Frontier because I like the game a lot, but it's very repetitive. So apparently, I hate myself because I play that game because there are 7 quests in Saga Frontier, and they're each about 15 hours long. So I don't want to stick on Saga Frontier for too long. But that's about it.
Yeah, that's hefty.
Yeah. Well, it's 15. You do the same thing pretty much 7 times.
Oh, so you do hate yourself. All right, awesome. Well, okay. In that case, let's go into what our actual topic is for today. We kind of been hinting at it, I suppose, at this point.
Not really.
I mean, whatever, man. I mentioned Quest 64. That should be enough. And Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah.
But no, our topic for this episode is the Nintendo 64.
Everyone's favorite console.
I mean, it's
not really.
It's somebody's.
Yes.
So I guess without further ado, Chris, why don't you take it away and tell us about the Nintendo 64?
The 16-bit generation is coming to a close. Nintendo sits on top of the mountain after a hard-fought console war with Sega. After dominating the market with the NES, Sega's Genesis had shown the king could be defeated against the mighty SNES. But that was the past, and now Nintendo had a new system to introduce to the world. One that couldn't lose. It had 16 bits of processing power. Do the math. It was going to be more powerful than Sony's PlayStation, and Sega's 32X or Saturn or whatever they were doing with themselves at the time. We don't know. And they still had the working relationships with all the third-party developers and the first-party titles that made Nintendo brand so special to continue their dominance. Another console round was set to be dominated by the big N. The hype was there, the anticipation was there, Mario and Zelda were there. What could go wrong? The Nintendo 64 is one of the most anticipated consoles of all time. With a project name of Project Reality, and largely going by the moniker of Ultra 64 later, Nintendo had been building hype through marketing almost 2 years in advance, which could be found in the arcade games Killer Instinct and Cruisin' USA if you remember those games back in the arcades at the time. It was made with a partnership with Silicon Graphics, who worked with Nintendo after Sega had turned down their technology. Development would start in 1993, with the possibility of being a CD-based console, before Nintendo made what could have been the most controversial decision in the history of the company, sticking with cartridges. End specs for the console would consist of a 64-bit NEC VR4300 CPU at 93.75 MHz, with 4 megabytes of RD RAM, which was expandable with an additional 4 megabyte expansion pack, with a Silicon Graphics graphics processor GPU that ran at 62.5 MHz. In November of 1995, Nintendo changed the name of the system from the Ultra 64 to the Nintendo 64, with an estimated launch of April of 1996. After some delays, the console would eventually release on June 23, 1996 in Japan, and September 29, 1996 in the Americas for around $200, the cheapest of all the major competitors. PAL markets would have to wait until March of the following year. Despite only launching with 2 games, Mario 64 and Pilot Wing 64, it sold extremely well, being a hard-to-find item and outselling both the Saturn and the PlayStation throughout early 1997. Time magazine called it the Machine of the Year for 1996, with celebrities and gamers hotly wanting one for themselves. Even the fact that it had cartridges instead of CDs was being celebrated and praised as a plus, as the lack of loading times made the other systems feel, quote, sluggish and slower than the new vaunted Nintendo 64. The Nintendo was heralded as being one of the most unique and innovative controllers ever made, mostly due to the analog stick and how it handled Mario 64 at the time and other 3D platformers. The Big N had arrived with their behemoth, and it looked as if they were going to once again dominate the gaming market once again. However, sales would not maintain throughout the system's lifespan. While the N64 sold well in the North American region at roughly 20 million units, it was still a distant second to the PlayStation, which sold 39 million units in the same area. Japan would be the biggest surprise, with Nintendo placing third for the generation, selling almost 500,000 units less than Sega's woe-begotten Saturn. The N64 would go on to only sell 33 million units worldwide, which was the worst sales for a home console for Nintendo up to that point, and paled in comparison to the PlayStation 1's 104 million units sold. Sony's ability to lure third-party companies away due to their cheaper licensing fees and this cheaper CD format that allowed beautiful full-motion video and larger storage space spelled doom for Nintendo. Even the quality first-party content could not make up for losing the support from companies like Capcom, Konami, and perhaps most importantly, Square, who almost single-handedly crushed all momentum the system had with Final Fantasy VII. It wouldn't be until the Wii that Nintendo would come back to once again dominate the home market. Despite the overwhelming defeat for the generation, the N64 would have a legacy of housing some of the best or most revolutionary games ever made for the time, which continues to be a legacy for the company itself today. And that is your brief history of the Nintendo 64.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for our brief history of the N64. Man, I got a lot of things to say about the N64, and we probably don't have enough time to fit it all in, but I feel like we're going to come to the conclusion that this is another one of those things that I am giving more credit to than it deserves. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
Well, we'll see. I mean, you have your perspective. I have my perspective. It sounds... in previous conversations we've had off the show, it seems like you are more sympathetic to the N64 than I am. You have fonder memories of it, or a current, more positive feeling about the N64 than I do.
Yeah, I do. And of course, this all comes down to, like, well, partially nostalgia, but also just, childhood experience, I guess. Mm-hmm. So, I suppose that'll function as a good segue into kind of like our experiences with this thing. So for myself, I actually had to do a little bit of research on this one to nail down the correct timing, because I am in fact an old man by now, and so my memories of these things have gotten a little hazy. But the one thing I do remember, and I believe I actually told this story on one of our episodes before, it actually might have been our Doom episode. The one piece of information I do remember about getting my Nintendo 64 was I also got Doom 64 along with it for Christmas. And at first I thought that I had gotten the N64 the year that it came out, but that's actually technically not correct. Using the release date of Doom 64 as a barometer, I can pretty accurately nail down that I believe I got it the Christmas of the following year that the 64 came out, because that is when Doom 64 came out, was in 1997. Mm-hmm. So I think it was that Christmas, and I recall getting the actual machine, and I was super stoked about that. Of course, both my brother and I flipped our shit, not quite as much as the now infamous Nintendo 64 Kid video, which if you've never seen that, you should go look it up.
It's great.
But we were definitely excited, and I know we got Mario 64 along with it, of course. I think it was actually a pack-in anyway, so it just came with the console. But my parents knew that I was a big Doom fan, and I had asked for Doom 64, if predicated on the assumption I was going to get an N64 for Christmas. And the reason that I tell this story is, and the reason it's memorable for me, is because it was probably the one time in my life where I was like the most bratty, ungrateful kid in the whole world. So you could ask my parents, like, by and large, I was a pretty good kid. But this particular instance, for whatever reason, I was that kid who was like being pissy about a gift that he got on Christmas. And you might wonder why, because you're like, whatever, man, you just got an N64. That's like, what the fuck are you complaining about? I hated Doom 64.
Yep.
And I actually went back and replayed some of it today, as a matter of fact. And I can see why I hated it. But I think maybe I was a little harsh on it when I was younger. But without turning this into a Doom 64 episode, basically, I just really hated the fact that it was way too dark. I couldn't see shit. The second level of that game literally throws you into a series of hallways that are pitch black, which is not necessarily something that the original Doom ever did. It was, for being as violent and whatever of a game as it is, it actually was fairly well lit. So it was impossible to fucking see, and also it didn't feel like Doom. And now, in my old age, I realize why, by the way. They totally just straight out ripped a bunch of shit from Quake and put it in Doom 64.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, like the shotgun in Doom 64 is totally just the Quake shotgun, which is not a bad shotgun, but it's not the Doom shotgun. So
they're made by the same people anyway, so who cares?
I care, Chris.
No.
I care.
Oh, well.
These things matter.
Okay.
And also, even though they kind of made like quote unquote updated sprites for all of the monsters in Doom 64, I would argue that they're worse. The undead Marines or whatever look like shit. But anyway, I played through about 2 levels of Doom 64 on my brand new N64 on Christmas Day, and immediately pulled the cartridge out and started whining to my parents that I wanted them to return it because it was garbage. They were pissed.
Oh, I would be too.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think we ever, no, we did. It wasn't that day, of course, because it was Christmas Day, but sometime within that week, we actually did end up going back to, I believe it was Sears, where my grandmother, by the way, that's also the other part of the story. My grandmother was the one that bought me that N64. So not only was I being pissy to my parents about this, I was also being ungrateful to my grandmother. So I was just the greatest kid on that particular Christmas.
Douchebag.
Yeah. Yeah. But we did go and actually end up returning it. We got our money back, and I ended up buying a different game. I don't remember what it was. Probably, I don't know, fucking Shadows of the Empire or something, which was also a great investment. But anyway, that's how I got my N64. That was my experience with it to begin with. So bad Doom 64 experience aside, I also had Mario to play, which conversely was fucking blew my mind at that time. Because that was outside of some of the stuff that I was playing on PC, because PC gaming was a little bit ahead of this. It was probably one of the first polygonal games I had played on a console, so that was like just a whole new thing, which was amazing. But what about you? So what was your? Because I think you didn't have it initially, did you? Or did you come to it later, or what was the deal with that?
So I think I mentioned this in the PlayStation episode. So I got mine for Christmas of the first year. So I got it December.
So you actually got it before me.
Yeah, I got it December 1996. And if I remember correctly, I got it with Mario 64, Shadows of the Empire, and Bomberman 64. I had to have Bomberman 64 because I was really into Bomber. I love Bomberman because the after school babysitter we had at the time, her kid had a TurboGrafx 16. And one of our favorite games of everyone who was there was Bomberman. So I had to have Bomberman 64, and I was extremely disappointed because it wasn't like the original Bomberman. I mean, I didn't complain to my parents and ask them that they return it like some spoiled little brats did. But
yeah, that sounds like a dick move.
Yeah, total dick move. But Mario 64 was fantastic. It was mind blowing. It like you said, Mario 64 is the definitive 3D game, like, of all time. It showed everyone how you're supposed to have objects and characters move in a 3D open environment. I don't think any other game really defined how you were supposed to do that. And the N64, with its controller, which is bizarre now looking back at it, was the only controller you could play Mario 64 with at the time. There was nothing else that would satisfy that game. Nothing.
Right.
So it was mind-blowing. Now, my brother got a PlayStation, and my sister got a Saturn. For everyone who cares, the Saturn at this point was doing so poorly that they had 3 games that came with the Saturn for free. You got so the Saturn was gone already in late 1996. Like, it was already on its way out. But as time progressed, I was still a Nintendo 64 loyalist for the most part, because when I say, like, when in the brief history, when I'm talking about how Nintendo stuck with cartridges, and now everyone laughs at them for that decision in current year, and have for probably the past 10 years in a retrospective view, like, what were they thinking? Why did they go with cartridges? That's so stupid of them. Why did they do it? In 1996, everyone who got a Nintendo 64, everybody who got a Nintendo 64, loved the fact that they were still cartridges. Like, I can't, it's hard to put it in perspective, but everyone was like, well, my Nintendo 64 is a cartridge-based system. I don't have to deal with your shitty load times. Because I rented, like, Street Fighter Alpha back in the day. I rented it, or I got it, like, really cheap at Blockbuster, and I brought it home to play it on my brother's PlayStation, and the loading times for that game are infuriating. And it was awful. And you're like, thank God, when I go play my Nintendo 64, nothing needs to load.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, that's like, I talked about this before too, but like I never owned a PlayStation, but I went and rented one from the local Blockbuster at the time. And that was one of the things that was like painfully apparent between the two. Is like, I'd bring, the PlayStation home, and I'd have rented, whatever it was I was playing. I don't remember now, but you throw a disc in there, and yeah, you'd have to sit there and wait. And comparatively, I was like, having the N64 at home, I was like, oh, this kind of sucks. I mean, like, I guess maybe the graphics are a little better, I suppose. And, you get full motion video. That's cool. But man, there's a lot of waiting.
Yeah, it was. And the RPG revolution hadn't really started yet. People weren't really into RPGs. People weren't really into anime yet. So you didn't have those things really coming in. You didn't really have developers taking advantage of the space that CDs were providing early in the PlayStation's life, at least with high quality games. You didn't really have it. Full motion video in most games was still super cheesy. If you don't believe me, just go play Need for Speed. Just go do it.
Or Command and Conquer.
Command and Conquer, or I think it's called Stellar Fire, or just anything from that era. Anything by Crystal Dynamics.
Man, go play fucking Night Trap. That whole thing is full motion.
Well, that's not a PlayStation game.
Terrible.
That's not a PlayStation game. It's a Sega CD
I know
game.
that.
But yeah, it's still an example of what people are doing with FMV at the time. So you get the N64, and those two games, only having two games come out at launch, and essentially three, because right after it, Cruisin' USA came out. And only having those games, Killer Instinct Gold came out not too long after that too. And which was disappointing, because fighting games on the Nintendo 64 were absolute shit, just because the controller wouldn't allow it. So, and
hey, come on, man, you're not a fan of Clay Fighters?
Well, I mean, it potentially had good fighting games. Well, Clay Fighter aside, even though for some stupid ass reason that game's worth, $500-$600, the Sculptor's Cut edition. But it had potential for good fighting games. When you talk about Killer Instinct, it's Killer Instinct Gold, which essentially is a modified version of Killer Instinct 2, and you have the Mortal Kombat trilogy, which had no loading times compared to like the PlayStation version. It had the potential to be good, but the controller was garbage for fighting games. So,
oh, just for fighting games, okay.
Well, 2D platformers too. And that's why, outside of Mischief Makers, I can't think of any 2D platformers up the top. Well, Yoshi's Story.
Yoshi's Story, yeah.
Kirby 64, kind of, but they're not big. They aren't really regarded as fantastic games like their predecessors were. And the big games for the system. So as time went on, and we can talk more about, so that's my experience with the N64. I got it. I loved it. I loved it for a few years. And then I would say once Final Fantasy VII came out, even though I was like a hater on Final Fantasy VII, even though I played it and liked it, I told everyone I didn't. After that game came out, and after I saw games like Gran Turismo and the PlayStation and Resident Evil, and I started seeing what games with CD quality could do against the Nintendo 64, that's when I started realizing there are some serious problems with this system. And it a lot of the praise really isn't there, even though it has some really, really fantastic games.
All right, so that functions as a good segue. So we've been talking, or you've been talking a lot about the controller. So let's talk about that, right? I feel like we already have a sense of what your thoughts are on that thing. maybe not the biggest fan. I'm not going to say that I'm going to defend it, but as we all, or most of us know, Nintendo has sort of a track record of being, let's go with experimental,
innovative
with some of the things they do. Sure, innovative. That's a good buzzword. Let's do that. So they're innovative, and sometimes it works like exceedingly well. Please see the Wii, for example. Right. And then sometimes it doesn't, like maybe the Wii U. So this was another one of those times where I think that they were trying to be innovative, and also, to be fair, I guess there wasn't a lot of a precedent for this sort of control scheme either. So as funky as the controller layout is, and it is super fucking weird, particularly in retrospect, as you were saying, I actually think it worked pretty well for the most part. I know that controller gets a lot of hate, but for the system and for the majority of the games released for that system, particularly first party titles, but I feel like that's kind of a given, right? Because of course they're designing with it in mind. I actually don't think it's that bad.
I actually don't mind the N64 controller. I actually think it's a decent controller. It's bad for 2D games.
Sure.
It's not a good 2D controller. It's a terrible 2D controller. And that's because it feels awkward to use the D-pad on that controller.
Yeah, well, yeah, and because I was trying to think of any instances where I would have not held the controller, like, you know, like left hand in the middle and then right hand on like the C buttons. Mm-hmm. And I guess it would be platformers, right? 2D. That would be the only time you'd want to hold it like a more traditional controller. But then you've got this freaking huge piece in the middle sticking down for no reason.
Right. And it's not a bad D-pad. It's actually a really decent D-pad. It's just like a Super Nintendo D-pad. It's better than the GameCube's D-pad, that's for sure. It's better than the Wiimote's D-pad. It's not.
It's better than the Switch's D-pad because it doesn't really have one.
The Switch doesn't have a D-pad.
That's what I said. That's what I need.
But yeah, it's a good D-pad. The buttons are good. The R and L is good. It's just it's weird holding it.
It's probably stupid. It's probably stupid, but like I actually really appreciated the Z button layout, particularly for something like GoldenEye, just because it felt like you were actually holding like a gun controller, which I thought was kind of cool.
100%. And a lot of companies didn't get really behind that until later when R2 started being, I think it may have been like the 360 generation. I don't know. I didn't play a lot of first-person shooters, so it may have happened in the PlayStation era. But like when the R2 button started being the default fire button for games, when things started feeling more like a trigger again, and GoldenEye got that right off the bat. And to go back to the controller, when Nintendo came out with that controller, there was no standard for a controller with an analog stick. There was zero standard there, and like people still didn't know how to make 3D games, and that's one of the reasons that Bubsy 3D is so terrible. You know that it's a terrible game. It's poorly designed, everything like that. But no one knew how to make 3D games. No one knew. Like another one, I have a game very obscure. It's called Floating Runner for the PlayStation, and it's a 3D game, but they don't know how to make it. Jumping Flash was experimental. A lot of people like that. More known PlayStation game, but it didn't really address how to work in a 3D environment. And that's Mario 64 did that, and it married it with the controller. And like I said, there's no other way to play Mario 64 at the time it was released other than with an N64 controller. And that even goes for like Star Fox 64. I can't play Star Fox 64 on any other system than the N64, just because of how the C buttons are oriented and what those things do and how the A and B are oriented. Like, there is just no better way to play Star Fox 64 than with an N64 controller.
Yeah, and I think it's also sort of like indicative of that uncertainty around, you know, creating these 3D games as the industry is sort of migrating from, you know, a 2D sprite world into these polygonal, you know, environments. That it's indicative of it, because if you look at like the top selling games, and granted, you have to take some of this with a grain of salt because a number of the top N64 games were also pack-ins. So like, of course, that's going to skew your numbers a little bit, but by and large, a lot of them are mostly first-party titles. So you kind of can see that maybe
they're all first party titles.
Third party.
All the top 10 selling N64 games are first party titles.
Well, GoldenEye was Rare,
published by Nintendo.
I guess that's true. Yeah. So, all right, then all top 10 then are considered first party. So I think that is telling, right? Because, I mean, apart from the fact that they're quality games, I would make the argument that they had a better handle on how to not only make these games good in a 3D space, but also leverage this funky ass analog stick controller in a way that felt natural and made sense. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. I think it got better once the PlayStation came out with the DualShock, because then you had like Nightmare Creatures plays well with the controller. I thought it did anyway. And
I'm not saying I'm not saying that only first party games, work well with it. I mean, there were plenty of other titles on the N64 that it worked just fine, but I think you can see it sort of in the sort of sales numbers that it looks like a lot of people gravitated more towards those first party titles, and perhaps with good.
Well, that was really indicative of just Nintendo. This is really when Nintendo lost a lot of their third party support anyway, just because the floodgates did open with Sony. I mean, you could say that's why they have so many games that are in the top 10. They're all first party. Okay, name a third party game.
Shadows of the Empire.
Okay, and that's like 15th. You're right. That's a third party game. But is it a quality third party game? I mean, really, is it a quality third party game?
Nah, not particularly.
Name a quality third party game that you could think of that matched what they were getting before with the SNES.
Nothing immediately jumps to mind.
I mean, they made a great effort with Castlevania 64.
Well, yes, an effort was made, sure.
But you could tell that wasn't as good as, say, a Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And you want to know what...
All right, Episode 1 Pod Racers.
That's the best-selling third-party game they have. And that wasn't an exclusive.
Okay.
Because that was on Dreamcast as well. I'm not sure if it was on PlayStation or not, but I know it was on the Dreamcast. Oh, and Star Wars Shadows of the Empire was published by Nintendo.
Well, shit. All right, I don't know.
Star Wars Rogue Squadron was published by Nintendo. So, I'm trying to look, I'm looking through the list right now. Until you get to number 26, the 26th best-selling Nintendo game. That's the first third-party game that they have. 26th best-selling Nintendo game.
And that is what?
WCW NWO Revenge.
Oh, okay, great. I never would have known that because I didn't give a shit about that.
And all the other games that you thought would be third-party games are Star Wars games.
Well, I guess the timing with that, too, especially with like the Episode 1 release and everything, I guess I could see why that would be popular.
So I could see why third parties stayed away. And that was a big problem when you look at Sony. And for the most part, Sony didn't really have a first-party presence on their platform. They had Crash Bandicoot, I guess. But what else did they have? I mean, think about like Sony within the first 2-3 years of existing. What do they have other than Crash Bandicoot? And I think Gran Turismo was released. I think that was released more in 97, 98. First couple of years of the PlayStation, what did they really have that was first party? What did they have that was exclusive? That's worth remembering.
I don't know.
So third parties carried them.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're talking about the top games. So what are the top 10? What do we have on our list?
In terms of sales, Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye, Ocarina of Time, Zelda, Super Smash Brothers, Pokemon Stadium, Donkey Kong 64, Diddy Kong Racing, Star Fox 64, and I'm surprised Star Fox 64 is below Donkey Kong 64, and Banjo-Kazooie. And good for Banjo and Smash, by the way. Good for them.
Yeah. I mean, that list isn't particularly surprising. I mean, well, I don't know. I would put Smash lower on there, but whatever, it's fine.
It was a big deal at the time.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
And I understand why Pokemon Stadium is that high on the list, but that game is shit.
I've never actually played that one.
It is shit. It's not a good game.
I think that was just based on a lot of hopes. That's what that was.
I'm actually surprised Pokemon Snap isn't on that list.
Yeah, me 10. Too. Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's too much further down from the top 10, but I feel like that out of any of them, that would have been there instead of Stadium.
Snap's 11.
Oh well, there you go. Yeah, so not too far off then.
No.
I mean, you could also have Hey Pikachu, the one where you just literally scream into the controller or whatever. You could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, poor man's semen.
Oh, God. Yeah. So looking at this list too, man, I'm sure we'll probably do a full episode about this at some point, because I definitely want to. But one of my other big things for me with the N64 was definitely GoldenEye, and like I know I'm certainly not alone in that by any stretch of the imagination. But that was like, for me, that was one of the first games that I remember playing like at a friend's house, like, you know, like at a sleepover or whatever. So the N64 being like 1996, 97, right around there. That was about the time where that started picking up for me. Like I was of an age where I was starting to go over and like, you know, have sleepovers at friends' houses and stuff like that. So like that was the perfect timing for that to happen, because I distinctly remember many evenings going over to a friend's house or whatever, and us having, you know, 4-player split screen co-op, or not co-op, but deathmatch rather, of GoldenEye into the wee hours of the morning. And going back and looking at it now, like, don't get me wrong, GoldenEye is still a great game. I might argue it doesn't hold up as well.
Not as good as Perfect Dark.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like that's probably sacrilege for a lot of people, but
no, it's not. Not smart people.
But yeah, I have a lot of fond memories of that one. I also played GoldenEye to death on my own too. I had a save file with like everything completed in it at one point, but yeah, man, I don't know, a lot of good memories associated with it. Which is probably why as a platform, I probably give the N64 a little bit more leeway than maybe you do or some other people do, just because I kind of feel like it, in true Nintendo fashion, I kind of feel like it succeeded in spite of itself. And like statistically, as you said in the history, I guess maybe it didn't succeed relative to its competitors, but I would still say that, you know, it was overall in the long term a success, if for nothing other than people kind of going back to it and appreciating it in retrospect now. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I guess maybe it was really just propped up by a lot of the quality titles that were available for it.
I really think it's not the first example of a gaming company letting hubris get the better of them, because I think Atari did that quite well for themselves.
Sure, yeah.
But I think it's the most prominent example of a company of letting hubris get the better of themselves. And like in the moment, everything makes sense, right? Why would you go to CDs if you're Nintendo? You have been dominating the market, doing the things the way you want to. You've seen the 3DO come out. That didn't do anything. The CDI didn't do anything. Even though you had a partnership with Philips, that didn't do anything for you. You've been successful despite the fact you didn't have a CD add-on. And you ended up eventually pulling ahead of Sega in all markets, despite the fact they had a CD add-on. NEC had a CD add-on. That didn't do anything for them. So now you have Sega coming out with Saturn. They have it's prominently CD. Sony's a new competitor. Okay, you're going to stick with cartridges. And you think everything's going to be fine because that's what you've always done. Especially the fact that you have been dominant in Japan for so long. And from what I can tell, like, Nintendo is a very Japanese-centric company. They're not going to change the way they do things until they fail at what they do in Japan.
Right.
And so what you see with Nintendo is they got slaughtered in Japan on this generation. Like, absolutely slaughtered. Which is probably why you see the changeover to the GameCube in the next generation where they finally are like, okay, we're going to do CDs. But we're going to keep them smaller.
I was going to say, but okay, we're going to do CDs, but we're going to fucking do it our way.
Exactly. And they got hammered even worse. But by that point, because Sony was unstoppable. But when they were talking to companies, from what I understand, going back and seeing like when they were talking to Squaresoft, because Squaresoft and Nintendo were pretty much joined at the hip through the entire, late 8-bit generation and 16-bit generation. I mean, hell, they made Super Mario RPG for the Super Nintendo together. And that was a great collaboration. And you could tell there was mutual respect and everything like that. And when they split hard because they wouldn't get back onto Nintendo until the Game Boy Advance, like late in the Game Boy Advance. They wouldn't like really release anything until like mid to late GameCube and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. But they split hard. It's because Square was like, hey, we need to do CDs. We need to do CDs. If we don't have CDs, we can't make what we want to have. And Nintendo was pretty much like, go fuck yourself. We're Nintendo. What are you going to do about it? It's kind of like the same attitude they had with Sony. Like, we don't need you. What are you going to do about it?
And well, just go and make a competing console and then eat your fucking lunch. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah. It's just like they had this attitude that they were on top of the mountain and no one was going to shake them. No one was going to bring them down. And then when Sony finally was like, hey, we don't have a draconian way of you doing business with other developers. And hey, we have CDs and they're cheaper. And hey, our licensing fees are cheaper. And hey, we're a multimedia conglomerate that's all over the world. So we have money to risk on this experiment. So, and our entire video game idea isn't a complete clusterfuck like Sega. So, come on board and we can do 3D better than their machine too, and it's easier to develop for. Yeah, Nintendo just, they couldn't see the forest for the trees. They thought that as long as they had themselves, they would be fine.
Well, sure. And I mean, but on like a less disastrous level, I mean, we still see that today. I mean,
oh yeah,
with particularly with Microsoft and Sony, because Nintendo at this point, like they're doing their own thing, right? And more power to them, because now, as we kind of talked about at the beginning of this episode, like they're fucking killing it with the Switch, and I think they're making a lot of really good decisions, which is a nice change of pace. So great, that's them, but they're kind of off on their own, doing their own thing. So it's really just Microsoft and Sony that have been battling each other for years now. And you see that with those two to this day, where each console generation, whoever is, the leader for that particular cycle, that level of hubris starts to set in, and they're like, well, you know what? We're doing good. We don't need to fuck with it, because why change a thing that's working? And most of the time it functions a lot like our, American political system, where you'll have one party that's in power for a while and then they do their thing, and then people get sick of that, and someone else on the other side comes up with something and they pull them in, and then they're in power for a while, and it just goes back and forth. So, we've been seeing that with those two for years now. And last generation, it was the Xbox 360 that was kicking ass, and so Microsoft was all it was like, and so, but they were the ones that ended up being all sure
they
themselves.
Did for a little while,
sure, but it was enough, and then
they went to the next generation with hubris, yes,
right. And so they went into the next one and just been like, well, you know what, you guys, we don't give a fuck what you guys want. We're going to tell you that we're going to release this new console that's online only with no discs and like blah blah blah, and people fucking hated it, and so they had to quickly backtrack on a lot of things. And then Sony, that was a perfect opportunity for them to just stand in and get in there and be like, right. Hi, we let you trade discs with your friends still. And that was like a mic drop moment. So it's really not any different today. I would say that it's not as detrimental, I think, as what occurred with the N64, and then sort of the ensuing stuff after that. Because like you said, Nintendo did not pick themselves back up for quite a long time.
No. And the GameCube, I think they were close, but they still make moronic decisions. And we could talk about that some other day. But when it comes down to what was happening, I think the other thing that killed Nintendo is their release schedule. So if you became a Sony PlayStation person, which pretty much everyone did, if you had an N64 and a PlayStation, like I did, it'd get to the point where you'd be like, okay, a great Nintendo game came out, but I beat it. What do I have to play now? Well, another Nintendo game is coming out in a month or two. Oh, but like 5 PlayStation games are coming out that I want to play. And by the time you get to those 5 PlayStation games, you start looking for them, and they'd all be cheaper than that next Nintendo game. Why would you want to play that Nintendo game? Especially, like, for me, if I was into RPGs, and I was big into RPGs, still am, Nintendo didn't have anything. They had, Quest 64, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But they didn't have any RPGs that were like what I was used to. I think they may have had Hybrid Theory or Winback or one of those games that kind of had RPG elements or stuff. But you look at what's coming out on Sony PlayStation, where you have Metal Gear Solid and Symphony of the Night and Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy IX and Gran Turismo. And there are all these exclusives, and with Squaresoft just fucking killing it during that era, especially for a JRPG fan like me. And why would you go to Nintendo when not only was Sony releasing game after game after game after game, they were also a more mature console. They had more mature content. Where Nintendo, it was all collectathons. Oh, I just played Mario 64. What's next? Oh, Banjo-Kazooie. Okay, I got done with Banjo-Kazooie. What's next? Donkey Kong 64. It's like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and so that's actually the reason that I ended up missing out on a whole generation of RPGs, because I like you, I'm also a big RPG fan. But like, I completely missed all that stuff like that first time around because I'd never owned that. So, and none of that shit ever came to the N64. So, and that was the only console I had. So I didn't get a chance to really experience any of that stuff. And it's funny that you bring up the difference in tone, I guess, between the catalogs of the two systems, because I do distinctly remember that as being something that I kind of noticed when I would go and like rent a PlayStation from Blockbuster or whatever, is like, that was like that was me being like, oh, I get to go play like Resident Evil. Like that's mature and scary. Cause like, none of that shit was like, I didn't have any of that for N64. It was all, like you said, I mean, granted, nothing wrong with it. I appreciate Nintendo's aesthetic. I always have. I like that they are basically like the tentpole in the industry for lighthearted, fun games. Like I appreciate that about them. But yeah, it was very different going from my Mario box to go get this disc-based system where I'd throw this, CD into the drive and have these like creepy door loading screens and all that shit. So it was like a whole different mood.
It didn't. Speaking of Resident Evil, by the way, Resident Evil 2 is a technical marvel on the N64. Just have to put that out there.
Yeah, I never actually played it on my N64.
It's just something to behold that they have essentially all the content and then some for the N64 version of a game that was 2 discs.
I imagine, did that require like the expansion pack or whatever?
No. Really?
That's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. The videos are extremely compressed, as you could imagine.
Oh, sure.
But
sure.
Yeah, I mean, the 2-disc game they figured out could be on 1 disc. It's less than 650 megabytes. But the fact that they put all of Resident Evil 2 onto one N64 cartridge is mind-blowing. That's it. By the time they did that, no one cared. Like, It was like Resident Evil was a Sony thing. I think like Resident Evil 2 came out when Resident Evil 3 was coming to the PlayStation.
I see. I feel like even though we're running a little long, so we should probably start wrapping up. But I feel like we would be remiss without at least mentioning the N64 Rumble Pack.
Which was great. A Rumble Pack was great. I don't care what anyone says. The Rumble Pack was fantastic.
I liked it. I mean, of course. Well, actually, that was the first time I had anything that was any sort of like force feedback in a game controller ever. So for me,
for a lot of people,
cool.
It was. Yeah.
Even though like it took up the slot on the back of your controller, so you couldn't put your the save pack
memory pack
or whatever, the memory pack in there at the same time. But
which if you had cartridges, I don't know why you need a memory pack, but whatever.
Yeah, well,
I thought they had fixed that in the previous generation, but hey, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like why you still needed the little expansion pack, the little red thing or whatever to put into the console itself to get some extra memory in there for some games. I mean, some of them required it. You couldn't even play the game without it. And then some were severely hamstrung if you didn't have it. Like actually Perfect Dark is a great example. If you didn't have that expansion pack in there, then you could only play... what was it? I don't even think
multiplayer.
Yeah, that's right.
You can play the campaign.
Yeah, the whole campaign was just unavailable to you. Like I think you could play multiplayer and then like the training like shooting gallery area inside the game, and like that was it.
And Majora's Mask you couldn't play at all, and Donkey Kong 64 you couldn't play at all.
Yeah. So definitely some technical limitations there, and of course those were, you know, eventual byproducts of their decision to go cartridge based anyway. But I still liked the cartridges, if for nothing else than certainly the load times. But even then, there was still kind of a, I'd say a familiarity thing, but also B, a little bit of a nostalgia thing going on already, because you were just like, oh yeah, cartridges. That's what I'm used to. That's what I remember. You know, like I had my NES and my Super Nintendo, and so this feels familiar. You know, as opposed to the wild world of CD based games,
which wasn't so wild.
Not as wild as the ARMS.
No. So, do you think that the N64 holds up today, Shane?
Whew. That's a tough call, man. I don't know. We didn't even really get into talking about the actual graphics of the system, which...
okay, so let's be brief. Muddy and terrible, short, crappy draw distance.
Yeah, okay.
For the most part.
There you go. That's pretty much it, yeah.
But a lot of games do it well, like Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Zelda to an extent.
Yeah. And then some of them do it terribly, even though I still like the game, like Gauntlet Legends, for example. That's rough on the eyes, but God, I don't know, man. Like I guess, like I would say that there are a lot of games for that system that I would highly recommend people play, for sure. Uh-huh. I guess with the very strong caveat that, like, if you're going to play it on the original hardware, you are going to have to get accustomed to an alien-looking analog controller, and B, get past the fact that a lot of the games look like mud. So if you can do that, I would highly recommend it. I would also make the argument that a number of the titles that are worth playing have also been remade in other places. For instance, Ocarina of Time, the 3DS version, in my opinion, is superior in just about every way. So if you've never played that, I'd play it there instead.
Is there a Nintendo system you could not get Ocarina of Time for? Well, I guess the Wii.
Game Boy Micro.
Oh.
I don't know.
I mean, home console. I mean, the Wii's the only one now because you can't get on the store, but you could have when it was out.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true, yeah. But no, I mean, if I was going to make that recommendation, I'd say play it on the 3DS because that's a really good version. But I would say I would recommend it, but with some cautions along with it. Let's go with that, because I feel like you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you missed out on some of those games that were available for that system.
Okay, fair enough. I'm gonna say, does it hold up today? I will say some games hold up today, and like a handful of games. And they are
like that top 10 list.
Well, there's some other games, of course, that you can play. And the wrestling games are fun, like WCW, NWO Revenge. Those are fun. I had a lot of fun with them back in the day, and they're still great fun. Paper Mario is still a great fun game. But as a system as a whole, it's really hard for me to say yes. I would say, like, the only reason I would say maybe is because there are such great games on there. But like you said, you can get those games currently on other platforms, and I won't say they're better, but in a lot of cases they are. Like Star Fox 64, I already said I can't play that on any other system, but almost every other game you can find it and it's better.
Sure.
And that makes what makes it rough, because there's good games on here. There's some really, really, really good games on the N64. But if you're looking at the three systems, you know, from that era, the N64, the Saturn, and the PlayStation, if you got to pick one, it's not the N64. Like, I can make a justification of why I would rather, like, I don't own a PS1. I own a PS2 and a PS3, and I don't necessarily need my PS2 because I can play everything on my PS3. So if I had to own one system from that generation, what would it be? It'd be my Saturn. I honestly think the library, if you know how to import for the Saturn, is way better than the N64. And it's not even close. And like how much in terms of volume and just what you can play. Like, I would rather have a Saturn than an N64. So I don't want to say yes or no, because I will say that Mario 64, again, is still a fantastic game, holds up well. And
yeah, also don't play the 3DS version of that. It's actually not good.
It's not that good. And Mario Kart 64 has not aged that well. And hate me all you want to.
No.
It hasn't. GoldenEye hasn't aged that well. Smash Brothers hasn't aged that well. Like, a lot of these games, their sequels are so much better, or you go back and you're just like, what's the big deal here? So I would have to say no, it doesn't, man. It really doesn't. I don't think it holds up.
Well, I think you and I seem to be in agreement that perhaps some of the standout titles from that generation hold up and are worth experiencing, but maybe not the system as a whole.
No. I mean, at the time, again, in the moment, it was something else. It was a revolutionary system. It was a mind-blowing system. It was what everyone wanted, and everyone enjoyed it that had one.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing that, you have to understand. If you weren't there and you're coming at this with fresh eyes, from in this current, environment, that is one of the most important things you need to understand about it is like, this was a first for a lot of things. It was literally trailblazing a lot of the 3D, polygonal games that we now have today. I mean, to your earlier point, Mario 64 was essentially a blueprint for how to successfully make a 3D platformer.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, you'd have to understand like why there is such a reverence, I think, for a lot of these, even though looking at it now, you probably have to wonder why.
Yeah. It's not like a lot of PlayStation games hold up well either, but there's just so many more of them. And there's just so much more quality.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that makes sense. If you're getting a steady stream of, maybe not fantastic, but at least enjoyable content, then I can't necessarily blame people for gravitating towards that. It seemed like the N64 was probably, if you were lucky enough to own more than one console, that was probably your secondary one for sure.
Oh, yeah. But I think that wraps it up for us on this episode. So, unless, Shane, you have any lingering thoughts, any alibis?
No, nothing I can think of. I think we covered things pretty well.
Outstanding. Okay, so as we say every week, for the most part anyway, we are on social media. We are on every social media. We are on Facebook. Well, anyone that matters. Not Snapchat, whatever that is. So we got the Facebooks, we got the Instagrams, we got the Twitters, we got our Twitch stream. That's on every Sunday at 9 p.m. The most recent one is me playing Streets of Rage 2, which I went through and beat on normal mode to start out with because only pussies start on easy. And we also have all sorts of stuff for you to check out, like our Patreon. And so that is what? Patreon or bit.ly/RHPatron. Am I right there?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Bit.ly, which is bit.ly/RHPATRON. And then we have our merch store, which is bit.ly/RHP merch, MERCH. If you're interested in getting any retro Hangover gear, which everyone who has bought that so far has been more than happy with it. So we're happy with that as well. So once again, reach out, contact us. Let us know what you think of this show. Let us know what you think about anything. If you're watching this on YouTube, smash that like and subscribe button because that's what everyone on YouTube says anyway. And Shane, anything else?
No, man. I think you covered it pretty well.
Outstanding. So
until next time,
smash that joystick.